Greetings and welcome back to our Dare to Teach series, where we are hoping to define the definition of the integral teacher, as we're calling it. And we now turn to the topic of purity or intentionality. Now, the assumption here is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down the left-hand side, Dare to Teach is our playlist. We gave 2 introductory set of comments, lectures, and then we started into the 12 core values of the integral teacher as I'm trying to outline them. And I took them in groups of 4 because I think it's necessary to kind of have a sense of that first group, as we talked about it, of honesty, forgiveness, freedom, and love, compassion. And then that led nicely into the second group. I say nicely, I hope nicely, into the second group of justice, hope, as well as courage, joy, and peace. Now, once you've kind of worked through those 8, then you're ready for a little bit more, I think, practical observations regarding the actual practice of the integral teacher. And we're into the now third group of 4. We've talked about discipline. Here we're going to talk about purity, intentionality, and then grace, mercy will be our next talk, to finish with gratitude. Now, as a practicing theologian and poet, I love to play with language, and I love to play with words and to define words in different ways. So it's not going to shock you that I'm going to use a word like purity in a much more expanded way than what some of you might imagine. Like, I'm going to get puritanical to speak of purity. Now, it is true, no question. The Dalai Lama is right in Ethics for the New Millennium that we are being watched as instructors, no question, by our students, by those outside of our classroom. And we do need to make good life choices, I think, as it relates to our students, to show our students that we are in fact authentic, no question. But I think each of us has to make our own decisions in regards to those kinds of choices. And no, I'm not going to here speak about purity from its kind of traditional understandings of do's and don'ts. Not at all. When I use the word purity, I'm going to be talking about a distinction that happens within the classroom. And as I've talked about this with teachers before, I've often said, this is a really interesting distinction, and it's one that I think maybe makes some sense to me, because we're going to talk about actions in our classroom that are either random or are intentional. So let's talk about this, especially as it relates to pedagogy and the like. Think about it. There are 2 ways in 303 that I can approach my whole day with my students, okay? One approach is the random approach. That is to say, I show up and I'm not really clear exactly what's going to happen moment to moment, hour to hour throughout my day. It's kind of that seat of the pants approach, and I'm going to just try some stuff. Like one teacher said, I throw stuff up against the wall and just see what sticks. And it's kind of random, and this is actually where I derived the idea, kind of random. Now, there's a couple of things I would point out about this that's, to me, self-evident now, but in the early time of my teaching career, it was kind of shocking. The first was I was stunned at the number of teachers that take this approach. Now, they don't often say it this way, but once you start talking to them, like, for example, I'll ask them a question like, so what are you doing, today? What are you doing tomorrow? What are you doing in, 3 school days from now? But if I then ask them, well, what are you doing in 3 weeks? What are you doing in 2 months? Specifically, not in general, specifically. Do you have a plan at that level? They will often look at me like, are you kidding me? I'm just trying to figure out exactly what I'm doing today or tomorrow. You're asking me about 3. Of course, when I ask, well, what about 3 years from now? It just blows the minds of most teachers. If I ask them, what's your plan for 3 years from now? What are you talking about? See, this is what I mean, this distinction between random and intentional. The observation that I made early on, though, was that teachers who I kind of defined in this way, and they defined often themselves as kind of random, I noticed they fatigued much quicker. Now, hear what I'm saying, okay? They grew much more quickly tired in the classroom. Because they didn't have a pedagogic plan, right? They were kind of, they also would report students quickly could kind of sniff out their randomness, their unpreparedness, and then all of a sudden they had all kinds of discipline issues. I think there is another approach. I'm going to make the argument that the integral teacher takes another approach, and it's what I will call the approach of purity or intentionality. It says that both teacher and student have a job to do. right? And there has to be a lot of planning for that coordination to happen, okay? I'm amazed, I should point this out. I'm amazed that the teacher coaches that I've known over the years, how unbelievably intentional they are in their training for their athletics, but in their classroom, less so. And I've often asked them about, well, what's going on? Like, why, you know, like when you run your sport program, it's obvious you take this stuff very seriously, as opposed to what's happening in your classroom, which is maybe kind of seen as a little less so. Well, students see that. Students perceive that, I think. And to that degree, I think it's all about energy conservation. If I talk to a teacher who's having trouble, and they will say it out loud, man, I just don't know if I'm cut out for this, I will often ask them about this level of random versus intentional, and guess what? Most of the time, those teachers are incredibly random in the way they're approaching their pedagogy, the way they're approaching their information with their students, and to that degree, I have found random, as I'm defining it now, random teachers have these really good days and bad days. And you'll often be able to tell this because they will say it out loud. Wow, I had a really great day today, not like yesterday was a really crummy day. It's kind of, to me, a giveaway that what you're telling me is that you don't really plan with a level of intentionality. And so when things go well, you're almost like shocked, like, oh, dude, this is awesome, as opposed to a certain level of intentionality. Now, for those of you that know anything about Plato's Republic, you know that this is one of the key arguments of Republic. We've talked about this elsewhere at learnstrong.net. That is to say, Plato argues that education has to be intentional, or you cannot make predictions for the future. I mean, you can be random all you want, but you're not going to be able to predict what's coming in your future if you don't have a real good sense of what it is that I'm doing. And again, back to our earlier comments for discipline, why it is that I'm doing what I'm doing. Now, there is no question. Let's just get this out of the way. I do not live in some kind of fantasy world. I know what it means to be finished at the end of the day and then have to look up and ask the question, what do I got to do tomorrow and the day after that? And now you're challenging me a week after that and 3 weeks after that, and then you're bringing up things like this year, next year, the year beyond. This is one of the reasons why I argue that teachers have to have some kind of mechanism. I've talked about the Teacher's Learning Journal. And when we help teachers learn how to play this game, they have the ability then to ask very quickly at the end of sessions, at the end of days, what went well, what didn't go well, how am I going to use this kind of information? When I teach this lesson again a year from now, how can I do it? When I teach this lesson 3 years from now, how can I possibly even have more to say about it? I need a little bit more information, knowledge in this area. I'm going to spend some time the next 3 years. I'm going to know this information better in 3 years than I know it now. I'll be able to... now I see what you're saying. Yeah, okay, I get it. So what you're saying is we become kind of reflective of what we've done so that we can then be informed about, you know, so we're gonna turn around and do this again. And this has been one of the hallmarks of concerns of a lot of teachers. I finish a year and then I got to turn around and do it all over again. Then I finish and I got to turn around and do it all over again. Well, the answer is, yeah, you do it all over again, but you do it quite differently if you're an informed teacher, if you're an integral teacher. Because you're always adapting what it is that you're working with. The key, in my estimation, however, is the following. And this, I realize this is going to sound a little bit like a violation of my honesty rule, unless you go back and take a look at what I said about honesty. The key, it seems to me, and I found this to be true with great teachers, is that you want to be intentional, but you want to appear often to your students that you are a little bit random. By that I mean, when I've watched great teachers, I come into the classroom, and I was very blessed to be able to do this, and I remain blessed to be able to do this, where I can go and visit and I can watch teachers. It's so much fun to do it. And one of the things I've noticed about great teachers is that when you walk into their room, it almost looks like they're going, "Hey, I got this thing. Can I teach you about the Pythagorean theorem? I mean, this is really interesting thing by this old goat from way back, and can I show it to you?" And it looks very, very random. Like, "Hey, I just got this idea." But when you actually pay attention to what they're doing, you interview them, for example, afterwards, you notice that they are unbelievably intentional in their preparation. I mean, I met a master teacher that said, every question that I ask in class, math teacher, every question that I ask in class, I've already thought about every possible answer, including all the off-the-wall ones. And if I get one of those answers that's going to take me in another direction and I realize the energy of the room is there, that's where I go. It's going to look really random, but it's going to be highly intentional. I said, really? How do you do that? Well, I sit and I plan and I journal, and I try to imagine all the possible responses to the questions that I'm asking. And I don't have a lot of information in front of me when I'm lecturing because I want the students to believe that I'm just kind of coming up with this information off the top of my head. But there is no way it's not in my head. And then the teacher showed me the journals, the online journals, where the teacher typed page after page after page, which, by the way, became cumulative. That's why I said 3 years. So, for example, the teacher said 3 years ago, I didn't know how to ask this question because I didn't really know the best way to approach. And I'm like, whoa, so 3 years ago, you were a different kind of teacher, but you were already gesturing towards the teacher you've become. That I will call an integral teacher. That we will, of course, call a master teacher. And that's the key. The planning here is the key. And, of course, again, it comes back to what? Energy conservation. If I'm so tired by the end of my day that I can't reflect for 30 minutes, I got a challenge there, don't I? Right? So to that degree, I may have to take care of remember our 4 quadrants and remember our 3 levels of teacher, student, and those outside. Teacher first, always, as I said. I may have to find a certain kind of mechanism, whether it's some kind of mindfulness training or whatever. I may find myself up 15, 20, 30 minutes earlier than I normally wake up, which means maybe I go to bed a little bit earlier, so that I can sit and I can think and I can write about, okay, what am I going to do today? All right, I got to give this lecture. Okay, I got to teach this. Okay, I've got a bunch of 3rd graders that I'm going to be working with. Oh, I got this situation. How am I going to handle that? How am I going to do that? How am I going to deal with that? Can I say this out loud because I'm challenging us to ask, how did this happen for me, not to me? We all went through that experience of the craziness of the germ, no question, and the COVID-19 project. We all had that experience as classroom teachers. And it was horrific, and of course there was all kinds of nastiness that got thrown around, and we were in the middle of the eye of the storm of a lot of that, no question. However, can I point this out? If I had to go online and I had to work with Zoom or some other technologies, it really did require that I began to rethink a lot of the intentionality of what I was doing. That in and of itself was not completely bad for us as teachers, was it? Because think about that. It challenged me to ask simple questions like, if I got to teach this concept and I can't be face to face, how am I going to get that information presented? Now, of course, can we say it? The 3rd circle, those on the outside. Most of the ones on the outside have no idea the amount of energy that we expended during that time. However, I would argue, if our theodicy is correct, we're asking, how did it happen for us? Did it help us to be more intentional? To help us to be more integral in our approach? I think that it could if we have the right attitude. And obviously, attitude is everything about what we're talking about here as the integral teacher. Can I say this out loud? Students are very complicated. I call them sophisticated in the last talk. Now I'll call them complicated. Why? Because on the one hand, they're children. Whether they're PhD students or they're 5 and 6-year-olds, they're children on some fundamental level. And to that degree, they want predictable rhythms within the classroom. At the same time, and I think this is true of the spiritually semi-nomadic student far more than the students of 30 years ago. At the same time, they need spontaneity in the classroom. Of course, technology has a lot to do with this, no question. Right? They play video games where everything is constantly shifting, changing, and then they come into our classrooms where there's a certain kind of predictable rhythms. That they want, but at the same time, they want spontaneity. So I will define the pure teacher, that is to say the intentional teacher, as the one who can accomplish both, have both predictable rhythms as well as a certain level of spontaneity, where the teacher is always able to adapt and move. Now, of course, this is a challenge, but I will argue this is the only way that teachers can grow old in a classroom. Do you get what I mean by grow old? In other words, if you're planning on doing this project longer than 10 years, good luck to you is the first thing I will say, because not a lot of us get to do that. It's very, very difficult to do that. But if we're going to do that, I mean, I've often thought we should start calling teachers the NFL not for long, just like the actual NFL, because it's hard to imagine doing this project for longer than a decade, much less 2 or 3 decades, no question. But if you're going to do it, one of the things you've got to be able to do is to find a way to get out of typical ruts. In other words, this is the way I've done it, I'm going to stick with it. Well, yeah, but our student populations are changing. And to that degree, to be intentional allows us to be able to move, to feel more comfortable outside of our ruts than inside of our ruts, and that is very, very difficult to do. I will say this, the teachers that have told me over the years, I just have to leave this because I can't keep up with these crazy students, to me that was a sad moment of a recognition that probably there wasn't a level of intentionality, as I'm defining purity here, that we would hope for. Now, why is it that this practice of purity or intentionality is so important? Because I believe that we're never going to experience in our classroom what we long to experience, which is grace and mercy. And I'm going to talk about that in my next talk. And I know that sounds really strange to use those two words, but I really believe that's what we long for in a classroom, is we want to experience, we want to present, and we want to experience grace and mercy. I don't think you can do it if you don't have some modicum of purity, as I'm defining purity here. So the obvious question now, to finish with our big five, is to ask, and by the way, I'm hoping that in some ways I'm kind of modeling in my conversations with you guys a way that I'm trying to do this. So notice, every one of these talks, I always come back to this big five, and I ask, can I practice purity as it relates to, for example, my epistemological positions, namely the fallibilist position? It's so easy as an instructor, especially one that's been doing it a while, to just simply epistemologically fall right into the absolutist position. I do it because it's right and I know that it's right. But here's the problem with that. What about my changing student demographic? What happens when a new principal comes into my building and all of a sudden changes all the rules, or a new group of administrators come in? What happens if I'm working with all of a sudden a new colleague who, for example, starts to push me? Am I capable of having a level of purity or intentionality epistemologically? I think I'm right, but I could be wrong. There's our humility. And if we don't possess that with ourselves, with our students, with those outside of our classroom, we're going to struggle. We're going to struggle to be able to find any kind of modicum of joy. Of course, ontologically, can I find some level of intentionality or purity? As I have been talking about some of these ideas, a number of you have said, you know what you're saying I already knew to be true, but I had forgotten it. You got it. The only sin is to forget, as we'll often say, of the integral teacher. The ability to hold on, to remember things. For some of us, we need a system where we can go back and begin to address these challenges ontologically. Who am I as a body? Who am I as a mind? Who am I as a spirit? In need of balancing, as we defined honesty, in need of balancing all of those. And how do I do that? Some kind of mindfulness training, some kind of yoga approach, some kind of prayer approach, some kind of practice that will allow me to center ontologically so that I can be more pure, more intentional in my classroom. Of course, psychologically and sociologically, I've got to be far more intentional than I have been in the past. I cannot address my anxieties, my fears, my concerns for myself, my students, and those outside my classroom if I'm not more intentional. If I just simply show up and I'm working random, over time I'm going to begin to doubt myself. Hear what I'm saying. I think this is really important. I'm going to begin to doubt my abilities. That's a rough one. We don't want to do it. Of course, sociologically, this is huge. I got to be adaptive. I got to be able to move. I got to be able to pivot. But I can't do that if I don't have some sense of kind of what my game plan is, where I'm going. Finally, of course, in terms of the question of the Odyssey, we mentioned it a number of times. I got to be able to ask, why did this happen for me? I have to be able to address those questions, and then I want to use those questions to inform what I'm doing. See, here's the thing. I'm not just teaching for this year. I'm teaching for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years out. Some of us would say 10 years out. I want to be able to look back in my career, and I want to be able to see the ways in which I've evolved, the ways in which I have gained some sense of self-knowledge. Now, I've dipped into Gibran's The Prophet a number of times. Can I finish with this one? And a man said, speak to us of self-knowledge. And he answered, the prophet answered, saying, your hearts know in silence the secrets of the days and the nights, but your ears thirst for the sound of your heart's knowledge. You would know in words that which you have always known in thought. You would touch with your fingers the naked body of your dreams. And it is well you should. The hidden wellspring of your soul must needs rise and run murmuring to the sea. And the treasure of your infinite depths would be revealed to your eyes. But let there be no scales to weigh your unknown treasure. And seek not the depths of your knowledge with staff or sounding line. For self is a sea, boundless and measureless. Say not, I have found the truth, but rather, I have found a truth. Say not, I have found the path of the soul. Say rather, I have met the soul walking upon my path. For the soul walks upon all paths. The soul walks not upon a line, neither does it grow like a reed. The soul unfolds itself like a lotus of countless petals. I want to dare you to be more pure, to be more intentional in your classroom. In your teacher's learning journal, I'll ask you or challenge you to think about a time that you were pure, that you were intentional, and how did that work out? And of course, maybe sadly, but we got to bring it up, a time when you maybe weren't so pure, so intentional, and some of you will say, you know what, I'm interested to know about this next project of grace and mercy as it relates to purity. Thank you.